All right. Okay. So let me get started. All right. So good afternoon. All right. A warm welcome to the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Public Webinar. And today's topic we will be talking about cockroaches. Scientifically speaking, it is the Platodia group. I am Maushan, one of the curators in the museum, and I will be hosting and facilitating today's talk online. Now, during the talk, if you have any questions about the roaches or questions for the speaker, right, please use the chat function to post your questions. Right, I will collate all the questions, and we will have a Q&A at the end of the talk. Now, to begin proper on today's talk, right, when anyone mentioned about cockroaches, most of us, if not maybe all of us, are quick to identify them as pests, right? The most infamous one is the American cockroach, and probably the second place is the German cockroach. People will think cockroaches are dirty, disgusting, gross, or in some cases, they are people's worst nightmare, especially when they fly towards you. But on the other hand, right, a majority of the cockroaches on Earth are not only harmless, but they also do play a vital role in our environment, such as recycling of nutrients, maybe even pollination. But it begs the following questions. In what other places do these cockroaches live in? Outside our local urban areas, like in Singapore, the nature reserve, or such as Bukit Timah or Sungai Buloh. And then, how many type of cockroaches do we have here? We have heard about the dried leaf cockroach, the burrowing cockroach, and even the peel cockroach, as you can see on the photos here. So how many species of cockroaches do we have here in Singapore? So today we will get to find out about the diversity of cockroaches in Singapore, and this will be shared by our today's speaker, Mr. Cristian Lucanas. Right. So a short introduction for our speaker. Right. He is from Philippines and is currently a master's student in the University of Philippines, Los Baños. He's also worked in the UPLB Museum of Natural History, Philippines, curating the Platodia collection. And he is actually one of the top entomologists I have known, right? To have described 4 genera and 11 species of cockroaches at this age. So, guys, without further ado, right, I shall pass the time to Christian. All right.
And good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, so for today, we'll be talking about diversity of cockroaches in Singapore. So as mentioned a while ago, so how many species do we have here in Singapore, or are they good or bad? So just a brief introduction again for myself. So I'm Cristian Lucanas. I'm a graduate student in UPLB. I'm taking up MS Forestry in UP Los Baños. I'm also a research associate in the Cave Arthropod Project at the Museum of Natural History in UPLB. So I've been studying cockroaches since 2014, and I'm currently working on a particular group of arboreal cockroaches called the Dorilea. So there's the one in the photo. So why did I went here to Singapore? So as I mentioned, I'm working on this group, the Dorilea. So these are arboreal cockroaches and are only mostly found at night. So currently there are 2 species present here in Singapore: Dorilea saundersi and Dorilea hainesii. So my goal actually here is to find or collect these 2 Dorileas in Singapore. And then, so also Singapore is actually home to some very known entomologists who did great works in cockroaches. So this includes Robert Shelford, who was born here in Singapore and actually became a curator in the Sarawak Museum. and also Richard Hanich, which is, I believe, became the first director of the museum here in Singapore. Then there's also Professor Murphy, who actually collected a lot of specimens of cockroaches and are currently deposited here in the museum. So, so again, what are cockroaches? So I do think everyone here is familiar with cockroaches. So cockroaches belong to the order Blatudea, and they are depressed, meaning they're most of them are dorsoventrally flattened. And they have a very notorious chewing mouth parts, especially if you live in cockroach infested areas. You probably have experience being bitten by them. They have this very wide and shield-like pronotum, which actually covers their head when you view them on top. So they're actually one of the oldest terrestrial arthropod groups. They're highly opportunistic and very variable in form. Currently, worldwide, there are around 4,600 plus described species. So, just a brief interactive thing. So, I do think everybody knows what cockroaches are. So, I'm going to ask you a series. I'm going to show a series of photos, and I want you to tell me if they are cockroaches or not. Okay. So first, so about this one, is this a cockroach? So you can type your answers on the chat box if you think this is a cockroach or not. Here, yes. This is not a cockroach. This is a deadlift mantis. So, but according to studies, mantises are quite closely related to cockroaches. They actually belong to a group called the Dictyopterans. So this one is belongs to the genus Deroplanus. How about this one? Is this a cockroach or not? Again, you can type your answers on the chat box if this is a cockroach or not. See, I'm seeing a lot of yeses. So that's good to know that you know that this is a cockroach. So this is a Pacific beetle mimicking cockroach. So this one is the smaller one. So this is Diploptera minor. Okay, next one. So about this one, is this a cockroach or not? Okay. So this is also a cockroach that also mimics beetles. So this is a female beetle mimicking cockroach from the genus Ergaula. Okay, next. So which, now this one, you have to tell me which among these is not a cockroach. So is it this one? So you see, let's label it 1, 2, 3, 4, starting from the left. So which one is not a cockroach? So someone is saying number 4, someone is saying number 1. 1, 4, 4. Okay, so I see lots of number 4, but actually it's a trick question because all of these are cockroaches. No? So, so all of them are cockroaches. So some mimics beetles, others mimic wasps, and the last one, the one for number 4, actually is a type of pale roach. So this one can roll into a ball when it's disturbed. And what's very interesting about this species is that they actually take care of their offspring, or at least 1 to 2 instars, and some of them feed on the hemolymph or the blood of their mother. Okay, last one. So, is this a cockroach or not? So a lot of nose. So this is actually a termite from the genus Macrotermes. But according to recent studies, termites are actually social cockroaches. So they do belong to the same order Blattodea, and they are more closely related to another wood-feeding cockroach, which is the Cryptocercids. So technically, they are cockroaches. They are more of a specialized wood-feeding social cockroach. So just a brief overview. So what makes a cockroach a cockroach? Again, we mentioned a while ago the broad shield-like pronotum, a very long antenna. So some have very well-developed tegmina and hind wings. So this particular species, Periplaneta americana, is very notorious for flying. And a lot of men and women and men actually are afraid of them. So, one particular character to take note, especially if you're gonna try to study and identify cockroaches, is the shape of their supraanal plate. So, and within this supraanal plate is the genitalia, especially for the males. So, in order to properly identify them, you would need to dissect them and check the shape or the structures of the sclera. So the one on the left is the male. This one on the right is the female. So it's just a general morphology of cockroaches. So why do we need to study cockroaches? First, well, mainly because of their ecological importance. So, many of the known species for cockroaches are very important in terms of decomposition. So, of course, they are detritivores. They feed mostly on decaying matter. They convert large portions of the decaying matter into smaller bits so that other organisms or even microorganisms can act upon them. Another one of their importance is that because they have several setae and spines on their body, they are able to transport microorganisms from one place to another, especially when they're looking for food. So in that sense, they are able to enhance the decomposition of some of the leaf litter, the other decaying materials in our forest floor. Next, they are known to, there are some species that are known to be pollinators. Some plants are actually specifically pollinated by a particular species of cockroach. And some of the plants, particularly the parasitic plants, actually depend on cockroaches for seed dispersal. So there are several species of forgot the genus of these parasitic plants in Japan that they have noted to be dispersed by cockroaches. And an interesting hypothesis of, I think it was Fisk in South America, is he noted that it is possible that cockroaches play a great importance in pollinating large trees, especially in the canopy areas, since there are very few bees they were able to collect in that area. So it's a particular interesting group place to study in terms of insect and plant interaction. Next would be there are several species of herbivores, or at least they are known to be pests of fruits and vegetables. There are also several species of cockroaches that have been noted to feed on orchids. So in terms of the horticultural importance. You know, they could be viewed as pests, but in terms of your forest structures, herbivores are very important because they push plants or encourage plants to produce more leaves. And last but not the least, they serve as prey to larger or to other organisms. So you see this one. Of course, without play, your food cycle and your nutrient cycle will not be able to continue. So you need these organisms to pass on the nutrients and the energy in your ecosystem. So in terms of cockroaches in Singapore, presently there are only the cockroaches in Singapore are known to come from at least 5 families, so excluding the termites. So these would include your corvids, your blatids, which are the most common that you would find because this is where your common house cockroach would belong. Some anaplectids and the other families. So overall, the present there are around 52 reported species in. Sorry, that's in Singapore. I wasn't able to change the title. So these are cockroaches in Singapore. So there are around 52 species, and around 7 of which are actually reported only in Singapore. So although compared to other countries, this is a bit few. Of course, this is as of 2021. This is based mainly on published articles. So an interesting note is that you have your 100% endemism in terms of Polispherina because this is just because you only have one species here. So surely there are more. And within these groups, there are around 9. So out of the 52, there are only 9 exotic species, or at least the species that have been introduced in Singapore. So this would include your American cockroach, the brown cockroach, and the Australian cockroach. So I guess many of you would be familiar with these species, especially if you find them outside or even in some of the establishments. I hope so. I hope not really. So what did I do here in Singapore? So in order to assess the diversity of the cockroaches here in Singapore, so first is I went into the museum and checked all their specimens. So then I surveyed online resources, which includes iNaturalist, and there's this Facebook group, which is the Singapore Insect ID and Records group. And last but not the least, so we did, together with the researchers here in the museum, we did some field sampling in Bukit Timah and in Sentosa. So let's just go through the things that we found. So in terms of the museum specimens, there are actually a lot of specimens here in the museum. So there are several boxes of dry specimens, not just from Singapore, but other countries, such as in Malaysia and other Southeast Asian nations. So this is just one of them. This is, they call it the clown roach. It's very colorful in terms of, compared to other cockroaches. So aside from the dry cockroaches, we also have several specimens that are still in alcohol. So these are your wet collections. And a lot of these specimens are actually collected by the late Professor Murphy. So we mentioned him a while ago. So overall, there are around 57 cockroach species in the collections. So these are mainly from Singapore. So that I did not count the specimens from other countries. So, and from these 57 species, there are actually around 40 new locality records. So this means that they were not recorded in any reference before. So it's actually quite a lot. So 40. And aside from the 40 new locality records, there are several undescribed species. So including this, we call it a cave cockroach because majority of the members from this genus are found in caves. But I would like to call them delicate cockroach because they're very small and they're very delicate. So, and what's interesting is that a lot of the new or possibly undescribed species belong to the group of Corridoidea. So these are very rare, or in a way rare specimens, a group of cockroaches because they're very rarely found. So this includes your nocticolidae, the cave cockroaches, and some of your Latindiids, or the paper thin cockroaches. So next, we did some surveys on the online resources. So unfortunately, there are relatively few entries of cockroaches compared to other insect orders. So, but still, there's a lot of them. So from these records, we compared them from the collections, the museum collections. And there are around at least 6 additional new country records for Singapore. So that's 40 for the museums collections, and then there's additional 6 records based mainly on online resources. So unfortunately, many of the specimens, or at least the photographs that are available, are actually quite hard to identify, mainly because you need to look into other characters like the structures of the tarsi, which are the feet, and some of them you really need to have to extract or examine their genitalia. So at least for the most parts, we were able to identify 6 additional new country records. And then lastly, we did field sampling. So as I mentioned a while ago, we sampled in Bukit-Timah the day and then in Sentosa at night. So again, very well, quite unfortunate that it's very hard to find cockroaches in here. Maybe because I'm not particularly, let's say, in tune with Singapore forest or something like that. So, but we did find some. So we collected some, possibly, or some additional new specimens for the country records in Singapore. So this would be added to the museum collections. And interestingly, again, we collected some 2 to 3 potentially undescribed species, including these Latindiidae, which well, I haven't really identified it up to the genus yet, but it kind of looks like from the same genus that I described 2-3 years ago. So it's quite interesting. So another thing to look into. And some of the specimens that we collected were still trying to identify. So that's it. So in order to summarize, just a bit of summary. So how many cockroach species are in Singapore? So based on records, there are around 52 species. Then based on our recent survey, including in the collections, the online resources, and the field sampling. So there were around 40 locality records. So there are around an estimate of 100 species in Singapore so far. But of course, this would still be tentative. I do think that there's more in Singapore, especially in the northern part, since it's quite close to Malaysia and other countries. So although I would think that the percent of endemicity in Singapore would definitely be quite low, especially since there would be movement of organisms from Singapore to other countries, nearby countries. And then we were able to increase the number of recorded families from 5 families to 8. So it's quite interesting. So next question will be, are they good or bad? So I think you would have a different opinion from me in terms of good or bad, but I think in general they are not inherently bad, although only a few species that manage to come into our homes, particularly the exotic species, can be generally called bad in the human perspective. But overall, I think they play a very important role in our environment, in our ecosystem. So, well, they're not bad. So what does this tell us in terms of diversity? So of course, there's still a need to explore different habitat types. There's a lot of minimally explored areas, including smaller islands. Forest canopy is actually a very broad area to search. So, and I do hope, and I do think that there are a lot more species present in the canopy. And then there are some species of cockroaches that actually live in the nest of other organisms, such as birds, burrows of mammals, and even reptiles. So it's very interesting to look into these groups as well. So so there are numerous undescribed taxa in Singapore, as well as I have examined them, and more importantly in other Southeast Asian countries. So that, and not just in terms of cockroaches, but also in other insect groups. So if you are interested in studying taxonomy or systematics, insects are actually a very good taxon to go into. There are a lot of orders you can choose, and many of them are still under study. So overall, there's a lot more work to do, and currently I'm the only Filipino epistologist. So I would be quite occupied with working on Philippine species. Although I would be very much interested in working with other entomologists who'd be interested in working with cockroaches. So I think overall that's it. I would like to thank you for listening, and I would like to extend my gratitude to the museum, which allowed me to visit, especially to Mao Sheng and the others from the lab. And peace be with you. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Christian, for your refreshing and enlightening talk on the cockroaches. Even I myself am also amazed that we have a lot of undescribed species of cockroaches in Singapore. But I guess it also is quite understandable that not many people are interested in cockroaches. Right? They are more, I would say, more interested in the more charismatic insects like, say, butterflies, dragonflies, or even the beetles. Right? Okay. Let's see. I think, well, for let's see. Okay, we do have one question for today. Let's see. The question is, without dissecting them, how do we spot ID that something is a cockroach, considering how divergent they can be morphologically?
Well, it's quite hard actually to identify at least up to species level without dissecting them. Although there are some groups that you can identify based on the coloration, the markings on their face. Although majority of the group, you would have to dissect them in order to properly identify them at the species level.
All right. Okay. So yeah, we do have to dissect them. Okay, we have another question. For cockroach species that are found both in Malaysia and Singapore, are there any morphological differences between for those species between these two countries?
So far, based on the specimens I've examined, they're generally the same. So I don't think they have been separated for long enough in order to show these differences.
Right, so those are the two questions we have. I think if I were to pose a question to you, Christian, is that generally when we find cockroaches, right, we always tend to find them in the undergrowth or near the shrubs level. I'm just curious, is there any cockroaches that might be living in the canopy areas and then they won't really venture down to the undergrowth?
There are, for starters, there are a lot of cockroaches that live in the canopy. And I do think there are very few that go down to the undergrowth. The group that I'm studying, the Dorileas, actually live on the canopy area of the trees, but they do at some point in time. I think when searching for food, they do come down up to at least a few meters on the bark of the tree. So they don't generally go down to the understory, but you can see them at least.
Okay, so I guess maybe if you've seen, maybe there are some people here who might be interested to study cockroaches in the future. I think the idea is what when or what time usually cockroaches will be more active, but there are people who actually venture out into the night to look for different animals. So if someone who wants to study cockroaches, like when or where can they see like the different cockroaches around?
uh, Actually, cockroaches can be, well, they live almost in every type of ecosystem, but they are generally nocturnal. So majority of them are active at night. Although there are a few, especially the brightly colored ones, you can see them active at daytime. So in terms of habitat, they are generally found almost everywhere. Although majority of them would live in your in your forest. There are a few that prefer drier areas, so sometimes under rocks where the rain it doesn't really wet the soil, so you can find them there. There are several species that live on nests of other organisms, including ants and termites. So, well, it would generally be depending on what group of cockroaches you want to find. So, yeah.
All right. Okay, we have a few questions from the participants. The first one is, what does the diversity or say the lack of the diversity of cockroaches say about the Singapore ecosystem?
Well, it's quite hard to generalize what the lack of diversity means, especially since I've only went to few spots here. Uh, Maybe Mao Sheng can help us answer this question.
Okay, so what does the diversity of cockroaches say about the Singapore ecosystem? I agree with you, Christian. It's a bit hard to actually to talk about this itself, right? Because there's still, like he has mentioned, there's still a lot of undescribed species in Singapore. And then from there, we also do not know what is their role, right? What is their what's their biology like itself, and we know like which cockroaches are maybe having a role with regards to recycling of nutrients, or they doing the flower pollination or the seed dispersal. We still do not know about it. So there's still a lot more to be discovered in order to know, can we have a better understanding with regards to the ecosystem. Okay, I think we have another question about the collection techniques. So, what are the collection techniques that to be applied for the field sampling? With Platodia, is there a technique to be best utilized for the collection?
What's interesting with cockroaches is they can't really be collected in well, they are rarely collected in terms of using passive modes of collection like pitfall traps, pan traps. So you really have to search for them. And since they are quite perceptive of their environment, you sometimes have to chase them in terms of grabbing and stuff like that. So in terms of collection methods, yeah, you mostly have to search and collect them actively.
Yeah, I do agree with Christian that passive sampling is one way, but we want to do active sampling can be quite of the challenge. Since we have all experiences on how fast cockroaches can move. Oh yes, so we're going to move on to the next question. How do you protect yourself from doing field sampling of cockroaches, as they are carrier of diseases? I think maybe before I add on to Christian, I would say that no, not all cockroaches are carrier of diseases, right? If you want to talk about carrier or vectors of diseases, are usually the urban cockroaches, right? For example, your American cockroach. But for those cockroaches in the forest, no, they are not known to be the carriers of diseases. Maybe Christian, you can say something else to add on.
Yeah, I would agree to what Mao Shen said. So they're not all species are known to carry disease. So I don't really sample in urban areas where you are least you know that these cockroaches would carry disease. So I'm not really sure how to protect yourself when sampling in urban areas. So maybe use gloves or something. It's actually very hard to catch cockroaches when you wear gloves. You can't really feel if you already squish them or something.
Yeah, I do agree with Christian. But usually I think in urban cockroaches, right, you always tend to experience them to be very spiky, because of the spines on their legs. But in a few cockroaches, not even though they have spines, but it's not that bad. So mainly, I would say in terms it's a bit like a physical injury. There's like nothing else to it. So if you really want to sample cockroaches, usually what some of these entomologists would do is that they will wear gloves on their arms, right, and wear long pants and shoes. And that is more than enough to protect yourself. And usually when you encounter cockroaches, the first thing they do is that they run away from you. Yeah. Okay, we have a question. Is there any morphological differences between the pests and the wild cockroaches?
Not that I know of. Yes. Well, first and foremost, the pest cockroaches are actually cockroaches that live in the wild before, or at least their species used to live in the wild, and there's probably still a population in the wild, and they just came, or at least they live in our houses because there's a lot of available food, uh, comfortable shelter. So I don't think there are any morphological differences. But probably, if you want to look at differences, maybe you could look at their mouth parts, since probably they could have changed in the availability of food or something like that. In terms of morphology, not so sure.
This one I do agree with Christian. It's hard to find morphological differences between the pest and the wild. Yeah, like some for those cockroaches from the Ectobidae family, right? They can look similar, but there are some of them are the pests, some of them are not. Yeah. Okay. We move on to the next question. Are there any examples of symbiotic relationships between the cockroaches and other organisms? I think it's in relation to what you have mentioned about how some cockroaches are found in ant or termite nests, or even say the bird nest.
Yes. Well, some of them are mostly commensalists. So the one that lives on bird's nest don't really bother the birds. They just feed on the feces and the other excess foods of the bird. Sometimes the 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 ants that live inside ants nest, the cockroaches that live inside the ants nest, they don't really bother the ants that much. So they're just mostly commensalism. Although there are some instances of, you know, are there of mutualistic interactions, particularly when you talk about the gut microorganisms, the gut biota. So the cockroaches provide food and shelter for the gut microorganisms, and then they help the cockroaches digest the food and stuff like that.
Okay. All right. We have a very interesting question. Is the diversity of cockroaches in my office drawer a good research topic? Um,
Hmm,
do you want to answer that?
well, I don't. Well, in my opinion, it's not. It won't be very diverse. So because as we've mentioned, there are only 9 species of cockroaches that actually live in human settlements, and majority of them would actually want moist areas. There are only a few species that live in more drier uh, conditions, such as an office drawer. So I don't think you would find very much a lot of high diversity of cockroaches in that area.
Yeah, I agree. There won't be much diversity. Probably only one or two species that is commonly or globally invasive. Okay. I think this one is quite a similar question. What is a good way to look for cockroaches in the wild for the average person?
Yeah. So if you are able to go out at night, then you'd probably see cockroaches more easier. But if not, then during the daytime, well, the diurnal species, or those that are active at day, they tend to be on the understories, understory vegetation. So some of them would actually do basking in the sun and stuff like that. And while majority of the species would live in the leaf litter. So while here in Singapore, I noticed that many of the areas here actually have the thick leaf litter, and when you scour over them, you'll find the cockroaches running.
Sorry, I think we will maybe take another 3 or 4 more questions before we end the public webinar. So let's see. I think there are 2 similar questions. Are there any roaches, that are known to prey on other insects or even cannibalize each other?
Yes. The So since cockroaches are a bit more opportunistic in terms of feeding, they would from time to time eat members of the same species or population that they find weak or that are already dying. So this is a natural way of cycling nutrients and energy within a population and within the ecosystem. There are several species of cockroaches that feed on termites. Actually, there's a paper that was published. There's a paper describing a cockroach feeding on termites in the central catchment. So yeah, that's an interesting fact.
Yeah, that is actually a quite refreshing view, you getting cockroaches, not just having to feed on rotting stuff, but also feeding on others. Okay, I think this one is quite a interesting question, or a bit more personal. Is why do you get interested in cockroaches?
It's actually a long story. Uh, I whenever I get asked by this question, I usually say that I was cursed. So back when I was young, so I wanted to study fish. So and then as I went to uh, college, then I want to study taxonomy in general, systematics. Then I saw this uh, a show in National Geographic where a Japanese researcher was taking care of his subjects, his cockroaches, his feeding. Then from that moment, I said, I will never study cockroaches. And then, and so I guess from that, I was cursed to study cockroaches. So then when I went into college, so I was assigned to my professor who's an entomologist. Then actually did work on web spinners first. Then he invited me to a cave, to go to a cave where there's lots of cockroaches, but he's not able to identify them. So I looked into it. And then from then on, I never looked back. So I've been studying cockroaches ever since that.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think we do have a few more questions, but I don't think we have much time to answer everyone. So we just take one last question. I think this one we end off as the end of the talk. So what is the most bizarre species of cockroach in your opinion?
That's a very good question. There's a lot of bizarre species of cockroaches. There are some that are able to roll into a ball when disturbed. There are some that releases toxic smells. Some that releases glue. But in terms of bizarreness, I think I will go for what? I didn't really put finger on it, but I guess I'll go with the paper thin cockroaches. Because, well, they're quite rare and they live in between the bark and the wood. So they're very, very thin. They're very hard to catch. So I think it's quite bizarre.
Yeah, that is actually indeed a very bizarre one. And then for my view itself, I mean, I won't say most bizarre, but the most interesting one is that, in Singapore, we do have that pure cockroach, and then it just shows this suckling behavior. I think, like you mentioned, suckling the hemolymph from the maternal cockroach. Yeah, and then that is the most interesting one that I've ever encountered. Okay, so yeah, Let's see, right? So yeah, that will be the end of today's public webinar. I thank everyone for participating in today and sharing your questions. Though there were so many, I think we don't have enough time to answer all of them. But we really thank everyone, especially thank to Christian for sharing your knowledge on the diversity of cockroaches and then some of the interesting and the unique ones. Okay, all right. Thank you everyone for coming today. See you.